I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask him to repeat himself. I just smiled. "Dad is gone," my son said on the phone. His voice was steady, almost practiced. "I took everything. You get nothing." There was a pause after that. Not the kind of pause where someone struggles to find the right words, but the kind where they wait for your reaction. I could almost picture him holding the phone slightly away from his ear, bracing himself for tears or anger or pleading. But none of that came. I told him I understood. I told him to take care of the arrangements. I told him I'd call later. Then I ended the call. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us we're not alone in feelings we rarely speak out loud. When the phone went dark in my hand, the room stayed the same. That's the strange thing about moments that change your life forever. They don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive quietly, sit down beside you and wait. The late afternoon light was still coming through the window, lying gently across the floor. The clock on the wall ticked on, steady and indifferent. The house did not react to the news that my husband was gone. But I did. Not outwardly. Not yet. I walked slowly to the chair by the window and sat down, the way I had done hundreds of times before. That chair had been my husband's favorite. He liked how the sunlight caught it just before evening. He used to say it made even the hardest days feel complete. My fingers trembled as I folded them together in my lap. I pressed them tight, trying to ground myself. Losing him felt unreal, like someone had removed a load-bearing wall from my life without warning. We had been married for more than 40 years. Long enough that our conversations didn't always need words. Long enough that silence felt familiar, comforting even. Long enough that I could sense his presence in the house even when he wasn't in the room. And now he is gone. People talk about grief like it's loud, dramatic, uncontrollable. But the first thing I felt wasn't any of that. It was stillness. A deep, unsettling stillness. As if the world had paused just long enough for me to notice the weight of what had happened. And underneath that grief, something else stirred. Not shock. Not disbelief. Recognition. Because if I'm being honest, my son's words didn't surprise me. That realization hurt almost as much as the loss itself. My son hadn't always been this way. As a child, he was bright and confident, quick to smile, quick to learn how to get what he wanted without ever asking directly. Teachers praised his independence. Family members admired his certainty. They told me I was raising a strong young man. I believed them. I was proud of him. But confidence has a quiet shadow. And as the years passed, that shadow grew. He became impatient with his father's slower movements. He corrected him openly, sometimes laughing as if it were harmless. When decisions were made, he assumed his voice carried more weight than anyone else's. He didn't ask for control, he simply took it. My husband noticed it before I did. He was gentler by nature, less confrontational. But at night, when the house was quiet and honesty felt safer, he would sigh and reach for my hand. "He's changing," he'd say softly. "Yes," I'd answer. "He is." We told ourselves it was stressful, that adulthood hardens people, that love would eventually smooth the edges. Love makes you hopeful, sometimes too hopeful. After the call, I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the kitchen and made tea. Habit is a strange comfort. My hands moved on their own, filling the kettle, turning on the stove, waiting for the familiar whistle. The sound cut through the silence, sharp and sudden. Steam rose, clouding the air for just a moment before disappearing. I poured the water, carried the cup to the table, and sat down. I didn't drink it. My son's words echoed in my mind, not loudly but persistently. I took everything. Everything. The house that my husband and I worked for decades to pay off. The savings we planned to use for the quiet years. The life we built together, brick by brick, decision by decision. According to my son, none of it belonged to me anymore. I wondered what he expected. Did he imagine me rushing to a lawyer? Accusing him? Demanding explanations? Maybe he pictured himself standing firm, defending what he believed he had claimed. Instead he got calm. And my smile. The tea cooled in front of me as I stared at the surface, watching the faint steam disappear. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the street a door closed. Life continued, relentless and ordinary. That was when I stood and walked toward the hallway closet. I knew exactly where it was. A simple folder, tucked away behind old documents and things you keep because throwing them away feels wrong. My husband and I had placed it there years ago, during a quiet season of our lives. We weren't suspicious people. We weren't planning for betrayal. We were planning for reality. Age teaches you that preparation is not pessimism. Care. I pulled the folder out and held it for a moment, feeling its weight in my hands. I didn't open it right away. Some truths deserve patience. I returned to the table and sat down again, placing the folder beside the untouched cup of tea. My eyes drifted around the room. The familiar furniture, the framed photographs, the quiet dignity of a home lived in honestly. I thought of my son as a little boy, standing on a chair to reach the counter, insisting he could do it himself. I thought of my husband watching him with pride, always ready to step in but choosing to let him try first. We gave him confidence. We gave him trust. We gave him freedom. Maybe we gave him too much. The silence in the room felt different now. Not heavy, intentional, like a held breath before something important is said. My son believed my silence meant surrender. I believed my calm meant defeat. I believed my smile meant weakness. People often mistake quiet for emptiness. They mistake patience for powerlessness. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked at the folder again. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. And truth has a way of arriving precisely when it's needed. I took a slow breath, steadied myself, and opened the folder. I opened the folder slowly, not because my hands were shaking, but because I understood what it represented. It wasn't paper. It wasn't ink. It was time. It was an intention. It was the quiet work of two people who had spent a lifetime learning when to speak and when to remain silent. Inside were documents my husband and I had prepared years ago. Not in fear. Not in secrecy. But in clarity. We had reached an age where pretending tomorrow was guaranteed felt irresponsible. Friends around us had begun to fall ill, to pass suddenly, to leave behind confusion and conflict where there should have been peace. We watched families fracture not because of death, but because of what followed it. One evening, after attending a funeral that ended in whispered arguments and tight smiles, my husband sat beside me at the kitchen table long after the guests had gone home. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at the wood grain beneath his hands, tracing patterns with his finger the way he always did when he was thinking. "Promise me something," he finally said. I looked at him and nodded. "When I'm gone," he continued, "don't fight. Don't explain. Don't rush. Let the truth speak for itself." That was the night we made our decisions. The documents in the folder reflected years of quiet conversations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cruel. Just careful planning rooted in fairness and foresight. Assets were placed where they would be protected. Responsibilities assigned with intention. Safeguards were layered so that no single person could claim more than they were meant to. My husband loved our son. Deeply. But love does not mean blindness. And somewhere along the way he had noticed the same shift I had. The impatience, the entitlement, the way respect slowly faded when no one challenged it. So he prepared. As I turned the pages, memory after memory surfaced. His handwriting on the margins. Dates circled. Notes written not in anger, but in concern. He had thought of everything. Not just what would happen but how it would happen and when. I closed the folder again and leaned back in my chair. My son believed everything was settled. That possession equaled ownership. That speed equaled control. He didn't realize that the very efficiency he prided himself on had caused him to miss the details that mattered most. Grief doesn't always demand action. Sometimes it asks for patience. The days that followed moved slowly. Too slowly and too quickly all at once. Arrangements were made. Messages arrived from relatives and old friends, offering condolences, offering help, offering stories I had heard before but welcomed again. My son handled everything just as he said he would. He informed me of decisions rather than asking for input. He spoke to me politely, distantly, as if I were already a visitor in my own life. Let him. I showed up where I was expected to show up. He listened. He nodded. Thanked people. I cried quietly at night when no one could hear me. I grieved my husband in private, the way we had lived our love, without performance. And all the while my son grew more confident. He spoke openly about plans, renovations, bills, reorganizations. He used phrases like moving forward and clean breaks, as if decades could be sorted and boxed like paperwork. Once he looked at me across the table and said, "You don't need to worry about anything anymore. I've taken care of it." I smiled again, not because I felt taken care of, but because I knew how little he understood. There is a certain kind of arrogance that grows when someone believes the story has already ended. My son spoke as if there were no loose threads, no unanswered questions, no unseen hand still holding the truth. He was wrong. A week after the funeral, the first crack appeared. He called me in the late afternoon. His voice was different this time. Less steady. "Oh, sure. Have you spoken to anyone?" he asked. "About what?" I replied calmly. "The paperwork," he said. "The house. The accounts." "No," I said. "Why?" There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, shallow and quick. "There's something odd," he said. "The bank asked for additional verification. They said things weren't as straightforward as they looked." I waited. He continued talking, filling the silence with explanations and assumptions. Clerical errors. Delays. Nothing serious, he assured me. Just inconvenient. I told him I was sure it would work itself out. After the call ended, I sat quietly and let the truth settle in. The process had begun. In the days that followed, more questions arose. More delays. More phone calls that ended with frustration instead of certainty. Each time my son reached out, his confidence eroded just a little more. "What did Dad set up?" he asked once, irritation slipping into his voice. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. He handled many things himself. That part was true. My husband had always been meticulous, always careful. He believed that preparation was a form of love. One evening my son showed up unannounced. I was sitting in the living room, the folder once again resting where I could see it, though he didn't notice. He paced as he spoke, running a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "None of this makes sense," he said. "There are restrictions, conditions. It's like everything is waiting." I looked up at him calmly. "Waiting for what?" I asked. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since his father's death. "For you," he said. The room went quiet. At that moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt. No remorse. Fear. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't need to. Silence has a way of forcing people to confront their own thoughts. Finally he spoke again, slower this time. "Did you know about this?" he asked. "Yes," I said. The word landed between us as a stone dropped into still water. I stood up and walked to the table, picking up the folder. His eyes followed it, narrowing slightly, as if he already sensed its importance. "Your father and I planned carefully," I said. "Not because we expected problems, but because we wanted peace." I handed him the folder. He didn't take it immediately. When he finally did, his hands trembled just enough for me to notice. As he flipped through the pages, his breathing changed, quickened, then slowed, then stopped altogether as realization began to set in. "What is this?" he whispered. "This," I said gently, "is the truth you rushed past." He looked up at me, confusion giving way to disbelief. "You said you took everything," I continued softly. "But ownership isn't declared. It's earned. And sometimes, It's delayed. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since the call that night, he didn't sound sure of anything. And for the first time, he understood that the story he thought had ended was only just beginning. He didn't sit down right away. He just stood there, holding the folder as if it might disappear if he loosened his grip. His eyes moved across the pages again, slower this time, as though he were hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something more favorable. I watched him quietly, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with the calm distance that comes when you finally see someone clearly. "This doesn't make sense," he said at last. His voice had lost its edge, sounded smaller now. "Why would Dad do this?" I didn't answer immediately. I had learned long ago that rushing to explain only invites arguments. Silence, when used gently, gives truth the room it needs. "He trusted you," my son continued, more to himself than to me. "He wouldn't shut me out." "He didn't," I said softly. "He protected what mattered." That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else I could have said. He flipped another page, then another, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. Conditions, safeguards, waiting periods, requirements he had never anticipated because he never believed they would apply to him. "This says..." He stopped reading again. "This says nothing transfers without your consent." "Yes," I replied. "And this," he went on, his finger tracing a paragraph, "this says the house can't be sold unless certain conditions are met." "Yes." His breathing grew uneven. He closed the folder and looked up at me, searching my face for something. Anger, triumph, accusation. He found none of it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. I met his gaze calmly. "You didn't ask." The words were simple, unremarkable, and yet they landed with a weight that surprised even me. He sank into the chair across from me then, the same chair he used to sit in as a teenager when he wanted something and thought persistence would wear me down. Back then, his confidence had been endearing. Now it looked fragile. "I handled everything," he said quietly. "I followed the will. I did what I was supposed to do." "You followed what you believed the will was," I said. "Not what it actually said." His jaw tightened. "So what now?" It was the first time he had asked a question without assuming the answer. "Now," I said, "we slow down." He laughed once, short and bitter. "Slow down. Everything is on hold. People are waiting. Plans are stalled." "Yes," I said again. "That's what happens when things are rushed." He rubbed his face with his hands, frustration bleeding through the cracks of his composure. "You're enjoying this," he accused suddenly. I shook my head. "No, I'm enduring it." He looked up sharply, as if the word surprised him. "I didn't ask for this," I continued. "I didn't ask to lose your father. I didn't ask to be told I get nothing. And I didn't ask to become the obstacle in a story you already decided was over." The room fell quiet again. I stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the fading light. Evening had begun to settle in, the same way it always did, slow and inevitable. My husband would have liked this hour. He used to say it reminded him that endings didn't have to be abrupt to be final. "When your father and I planned this," I said, still facing the window, "we weren't thinking about punishment. We were thinking about balance." "Balance," my son repeated. "Yes," I said. "Between trust and responsibility. Between love and accountability." He didn't respond. I turned back to him. His shoulders were slumped now, the confidence he had carried for years stripped away piece by piece. For the first time he looked like a child again. Not the kind you protect instinctively, but the kind you finally allow to face consequences. "You assumed control meant ownership," I said gently. "But control without care always collapses." He swallowed hard. "So what are you going to do?" There it was. The question had been circling since the beginning. The one that revealed what he feared most. "I'm going to do what your father trusted me to do," I said. "Nothing more. Nothing less. Days passed after that conversation, heavy and uncertain. My son called less often. When he did, his tone had changed. The certainty was gone. In its place was something awkward, almost hesitant. He asked questions now. Real ones. About documents. About timelines. About decisions he could no longer make alone. Each time I answered calmly. Factually. Without bitterness. But clarity does not feel kind to those who mistake entitlement for inheritance. One afternoon he came over again. This time he brought nothing with him. Not even the folder. He looked tired. Older. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered. I didn't realize how much Dad handled, he said quietly. How many things were layered. He believed in layers, I replied. They protect what's underneath. He nodded slowly. I thought efficiency meant strength. It often looks that way, I said. Until patience proves otherwise. He sat across from me, hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. I never meant to cut you out, he said at last. The words hung in the air, fragile and incomplete. You didn't mean to, I said. But you did. He winced. I thought you'd be fine, he added quickly. You always are. I let out a quiet breath. Strength doesn't mean invulnerability. He nodded again, eyes still downcast. I know that now. For a moment I thought he might apologize fully. Not the partial apologies people offer when they feel cornered, but the kind that require humility. But some realizations take time to mature. Instead he asked, Is there any way to fix this? I considered the question carefully. Not because I was deciding his fate, but because I was choosing my words. Fixing something, I said slowly, requires understanding what broke it in the first place. He looked up at me then. Really looked at me. I thought being first meant being right, he said. I thought taking charge meant taking care. And now? Yes. And now I see I took before I understood. The admission was quiet, unpolished, and for the first time sincere. But sincerity doesn't erase consequence. It only opens the door to accountability. There's still a process, I said. And there are still conditions. I know, he replied. I'll follow them. He nodded. Not because I trusted him completely, but because trust, like truth, can be rebuilt slowly. That evening after he left, I sat alone in the living room and allowed myself to grieve again. Not just for my husband but for the version of my son I thought I knew. The one I hoped would never put efficiency above empathy. Loss comes in layers too. As night fell, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not relief. Not victory. Just steadiness. My husband was right. Silence, when chosen deliberately, reveals more than confrontation ever could. My son had rushed to claim the ending. But endings don't belong to those who arrive first. They belong to those who understand what came before. And the final chapter had not yet been written. The days that followed were quieter than the ones before. Not peaceful exactly, but settled in a way that felt honest. The kind of quiet that comes after truth has been spoken, and there is nothing left to pretend about. My son didn't call as often anymore. When he did, the conversations were shorter. Be more careful. He no longer spoke as someone who had already decided the outcome. He spoke like someone learning to live with uncertainty. I could hear it in the pauses, in the way he chose his words, in how often he stopped himself mid-sentence, as if realizing too late that confidence without reflection had brought him here. He came over one evening just before sunset. Not unannounced this time. He stood at the door longer than usual before knocking, like someone gathering courage they didn't know they needed. I let him in without comment. He looked around the house slowly, as if seeing it for the first time. The furniture, the photographs, the quiet order of a life built over decades. His eyes lingered on a framed picture of his father and me, taken years ago on an ordinary afternoon. No special occasion. Just a moment someone happened to capture. I never noticed how much of him is in this place, he said softly. That's because you were always looking ahead, I replied. Not around. He nodded, accepting the truth of it without defense. We sat at the table, the same one where so many conversations had taken place. Some gentle, some difficult, all honest in their own way. He folded his hands, a habit he'd picked up from his father without realizing it. I keep thinking, he said, if I'd slowed down, if I'd asked instead of assumed. His voice trailed off. I didn't rush to fill the silence. You can't undo what's already happened, I said eventually. But you can decide what happens next. He looked up at me then, eyes tired, unguarded. Do you think Dad would forgive me? The question landed heavier than all the others. I thought of my husband, his patience, his quiet wisdom, the way he believed that people were more than their worst moments, but also more than their excuses. Forgiveness, I said slowly, isn't something you're given because you ask for it. It's something you earn by changing. He swallowed hard. I want to. Wanting is a beginning, not an ending. Over the next weeks, things shifted. Not dramatically but steadily. My son followed the process as it was laid out. He stopped trying to bend it. He asked before acting. He listened more than he spoke. It wasn't humility yet, but it was learning. There were moments when frustration resurfaced, when impatience crept back into his voice. But this time he caught himself, corrected himself. Growth rarely looks graceful from the inside. One afternoon, he brought up something I hadn't expected. I didn't just take from you, he said quietly. I took from Dad. From what he stood for. I said nothing, letting him continue. I treated his life like a transaction, he went on. Like something to be closed and moved past. That realization, I said, is heavier than any document. He nodded. As the weeks turned into months, the house felt different again. Not fuller, just steadier. It had adjusted to the truth and decided to stand firmly in it. Grief remained. It always would. But it softened, making room for memory instead of pain. I found myself speaking to my husband out loud sometimes, sharing small updates, quiet thoughts. It didn't feel strange. Felt natural. I told him our son was learning. Slowly. Imperfectly. But learning. One evening my son surprised me. I'd like you to decide, he said. About the house. About everything. I looked at him, surprised not by the words, but by the sincerity behind them. Why? He asked. Because I don't trust myself to lead without listening yet, he admitted. And because Dad trusted you. I felt some ease in my chest then. Not pride. Not victory. Relief. We talked long into the night. About responsibility. About respect. About the difference between inheritance and legacy. I didn't lecture. I didn't accuse. I simply spoke the truth as I had lived it. By the time he left, the sky had darkened completely. At the door he hesitated. I'm sorry, he said. Not quickly. Not defensively. Just honestly. I know, I replied. Some apologies don't need to be accepted loudly to be real. After he left, I sat alone again, but the solitude felt different now. It no longer felt like abandonment. Felt like space. I thought back to that first call. The certainty in his voice. The finality of his words. I took everything. He hadn't known then that nothing truly important can be taken by force. That love, trust, and dignity don't belong to the fastest hand, but to the steadiest heart. I didn't smile that night because I was stronger than him. I smiled because I trusted the truth. And the truth arrived exactly when it was meant to. If you're still listening, thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share where you're watching from in the comments. Stories like this remind us that quiet strength matters, and that it's never too late to choose honesty over haste. These are grandima moments, and sometimes the most powerful endings. These are the ones that arrive without a fight.